This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, you're all set on my end, Jean.
Okay. We have a screen coming up. There we go. All right. Perfect. Welcome everybody. So far we've got 23 participants on the call. John, if you can go back a little bit. Oh, actually, no, we were right there. Perfect. Welcome. And we had started to do this, actually the original program was set back for December. We were going to reschedule it for the spring, and if everybody can take a look out their window, I'm sure you're going to see the Connecticut River, because that's where we were supposed to be. We were supposed to be down in the pavilion in Old Saybrook, sipping wine and sitting around a round table, and everybody sharing ideas about how to solve this problem. So I thank you for coming on board to the virtual program of presenting this issue of Connecticut River aquatic invasives, especially in the lower Connecticut River. What ended up happening is that we have a number of people who are going to be speaking through 4 sessions. We had originally thought we would just do a 1.5 to 2 hour session, and then some of our citizen stakeholders and citizen advocates said that's way too long. So we broke it down into half-hour increments for the next 4, June 15th, June 18th, June 22nd, and June 25th. I will be sending that information out yet again tomorrow with sort of an update on what we did today. John, if you could go to the next slide. So this, how this came about was that Connecticut Resource Conservation and Development has a program called the Environmental Review Team Program. We actually have one of our eminent environmental review team members on the call, Ed Pollack, who's a soil scientist. And he actually just helped us finish this. He's pictured here in this. We just did a report, a natural resources inventory report for Andover, and just finished publishing it that last week. So the Environmental Review Team Program is about 50 years in operation. It's actually over 50 years in operation. And it's a free service to municipalities and land trusts for natural resource assessments and inventories. It relies on a team of volunteers that we gather. Basically, we assemble a team of volunteers. We have a database of about 25 volunteers, and we end up asking different people to volunteer based on the town's needs. So we might have a herpetologist, or we might have a cultural ecologist, or a botanist, or a wildlife person. So what ends up happening is that we meet, we visit the site, and then we come up with a recommendation. Each team member comes up with a recommendation, and we pull that together for a report. We have over 1,000 reports have been provided to various towns and municipalities and land trusts in the state of Connecticut as of today. John, next slide. So how did we get involved in aquatic invasive plants? One of our board members, Margot Burns, is very actively involved, and has been. I actually used to work with Margot down at the Connecticut River Estuary Planning Agency. And what ended up happening was that I watched Margot going out and surveying. I'm getting some reverb on myself. Huh. Okay, so we ended up, Margot approached the Connecticut RC&D board and asked if we would consider doing a 12-town environmental review team assessment for aquatic invasives, specifically hydrilla, that there was a significant issue that was facing the towns. So 12 of the towns of the lower Connecticut River Valley ended up joining together to apply for an ERT review. And the following objectives were to assist to seek funding for survey and mapping of the lower Connecticut River, specifically Hydrilla, and facilitate discussion between scientists and stakeholders toward management solutions and funding, future funding. And then raising public awareness, that would be right now, what we're doing right now, through the ERT process, and then engage in awareness of northern Connecticut river towns, which we've done, toward the issue of aquatic invasive infiltration. And Jane noted, thank you, Jane, that's a good point. If everybody can mute for the moment, that would help lower some of the feedback and noise. The final report to the towns, what we're looking to do is create a final report to the towns on the findings of potential impacts on the economy and natural resources to the lower Connecticut River and from the aquatic invasives, specifically Hydrilla, and the next steps. So through the next four, so this webinar and through the next three, you're going to learn about some of the issues facing this issue. It's not just about surveying and mapping the issues. There's impacts. There's economic impacts to both the marine industry, to the boating industry, fishing, and then our recreational industry. There's also major impacts to the natural resources within the river. So the Connecticut Ag Experiment Station, Greg Bugby and Summer Stebbins, will be our last speakers on the 25th of June, and they will present their findings. So I hope you'll all tune in about 2 weeks and through the next Thursday, this coming Thursday, the following Monday, and they will be back on Thursday. But up until then, we will have other speakers presenting on this issue. The other thing we're going to do is identify roles and responsibilities of existing and future stakeholders. So what I would appreciate is in the chat up on the right, there's a little box that says chat. And if we were at the round table down at the Pavilion in Old Saybrook, sipping wine and eating appetizers, we would be all casually gathered around. And I would ask you to identify yourself in this project as an interested person in this project and in this issue. So if you could identify yourselves, and I will casually, while the speakers are going forward, if you write these down so that I have a general idea for our report of who on the calls have an interest. So are you a casual observer? So you don't have to go into great detail of your interest in this topic, but are you a casual observer? Are you a citizen advocate? Are you an engaged stakeholder? Would you like to provide a leadership role? Or do you want to do facilitation? Somewhat what I'm doing now, or what Connecticut RC&D is doing. So it'd be casual observer, citizen advocate, engaged stakeholder, or leadership role. I'll type those into the chat as soon as Kathleen gets going. So what I'd like to do is introduce our two speakers, Kathleen Burns and Kelsey Wentling. Kathleen's going to go first. She's joining us from her phone, and so we will be. Kathleen can ask John to advance the slides, and I think we're ready to go forward. Kathleen, how about introducing yourself and let's go forward.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me okay, since I am remote on the phone? So yeah, you can just give a nod, good, I can Kathleen. See you, so as well. Great, thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here. As the slide says, I am the Executive Director of the Connecticut Marine Trades Association. And sometime late last year, both Jean and Margot had met at our office to discuss the particular issue of Connecticut, specific to the Connecticut River's aquatic invasives. And specific to that conversation, we did speak to the issue of Hydrilla, which I, over my career, have spent 3 stints in the Washington, D.C., and as an avid boater on the Chesapeake Bay for many years and the upper Potomac River, I certainly saw the impacts that Hydrilla has had on that particular thoroughfare waterway and what it did to recreational boating, which from an economic standpoint to the constituency that I represent, certainly is something that we need to keep an eye on, that we need to educate through our ranks. So, I'm very happy to be here. I was looking forward to the December soiree, but nonetheless, weather and disease keeps us apart right now. So we go forward from there. If you could advance, please. Just a little bit of how we look at the state of Connecticut, we've 118 miles of tidal shoreline. We rank 17th to 20th nationally as a percent of water, 1 square miles on one inland lakes. In our 180 lakes, 6% of Connecticut is covered by water. And for such a small state, I love to bring these statistics out, especially to my colleagues in other states, that says for such a small state, you know, we water certainly has a big impact on our region. And for those reasons, it is so important that we are doing all of the right things to protect those particular waterways. If you could go to the next slide, please. I wanted to provide just a brief overview of the Connecticut recreational boating scene. Basically, what is boating's impact from an economic standpoint, from a use standpoint? Because I think in all things must be balanced, as Jean and Margot and Kelsey and others have discussed. So I'm just going to briefly give you an overview that I've broken down to the specific region that we're addressing. Next slide, please. The overall economic impact of boating in the recreational piece of the boating industry is about $1.3 billion. The in statewide, it's about
I think you're breaking up, Catherine, a little bit.
There is about impact that from just the record that is impactful to our state, all sorts of levels. Within Connecticut, activity is about approximately 3,000 marine districts, 260 businesses, and that just within our particular district, which is within all of the congressional districts, the highest producing economic impact within the state. Within this area, based upon the data deemed from DMV and DEEP, there are about 34,000 registered boats in this region, just in the 2nd congressional district. And to give you an idea, in just the area of Old Saybrook, there's about 1,100. And these are the home addresses. These aren't guests visiting from other areas. This is just the impact of boating and from the registered data alone. If we zoom in just a little bit more to the next slide, and just looking at the membership in my own organization, just in the Connecticut River itself, there are 65 CMTA, Connecticut Marine Trades Associations, businesses along the Connecticut River with about 2,000 employees spread out. That number, I'd say, is a little bit skewed with a couple of larger companies that we have. But if we're looking at the impact from our small business community up and down the river, it's about 1,200. So, you know, there's a lot of people touching the water from the industry side. And just in Middlesex County alone, there's about 9,600 registered boats today. So there is a significant impact from the business perspective. And the importance that we see in being part of this conversation on what we can do, on how we can help. And if we go to the next slide, just from my overview perspective, I can see the importance of the involvement of the Marina and Yacht Club coordination and the communication that can be opened between the boat dealer and broker awareness and certainly how that can then impact to the consumer level through marketing and education. And, you know, I know from a user perspective, a boating perspective, the importance of what this particular topic is, and really want to put out to all those that are listening, as we go through this process, industry and our local community do want to be part of this solution to find those resources to help move forward. So I'm very pleased and honored to be here today. I really appreciate the opportunity to kind of give you an overview of what recreational boating means to this particular area of the state, and look forward to how we continue this project as we move forward. Thanks, Jean.
Okay. Thank you, Kathleen. That was great. Gives us a really good overview of the recreational and economic impacts. And our next role would be Kelsey Wentling from the Connecticut River Conservancy, who's going to give us perspective, obviously a perspective from the lower kayaking perspective, but from the natural resources need for protection of the lower Connecticut River and the Connecticut River in its entirety. So she's going to give us the bigger picture view. And Kelsey, I think you probably could speak to this if you are on board. Are you?
Yep.
There we go. I see you. Okay.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thank you so much. As you said, my name's Kelsey. I work at the Connecticut River Conservancy. And yes, this is a picture of me on my kayak out at Keeney Cove in Glastonbury. And I'll be talking about both water chestnut and hydrilla today. So next slide. I do like to always give a quick overview of our Connecticut River system. I know most of us are probably familiar with it, but sometimes the vastness of our river can kind of we can kind of narrow down to Connecticut, but it is a huge contributor to the Long Island Sound, producing 70% of all the fresh water that goes in there, all the way up from Fourth Lake, Connecticut at the New Hampshire-Canada border. And specific to invasive species for water chestnut, throughout this entire watershed, we at CRC have drawn on data that many partners have contributed, and we're now tracking almost 400 data points throughout the watershed at 116 stations and monitoring for 10 parameters at each of these stations. And then as far as hydrilla goes, we're working to kind of integrate hydrilla observations into this database. But as most of us already know, the Connecticut Ag Experiment Station has already shown us that over 200 acres of hydrilla are present in the lower third of the Connecticut River in Connecticut. And we know it's north of that as well. Next slide. So why do we care about invasives? Kathleen, of course, touched on a bunch of these. They do pose a significant threat to the ability of river users to recreate on the river. So anglers, boaters, swimmers, you name it. We all care about the natural state of our ecosystem, because when we have these non-native species coming into the river system, they naturally outcompete without a predator and can quickly overcome and overwhelm a microecosystem, threatening the species diversity, potentially overcrowding, using up nutrients, depleting oxygen levels. And then, as we'll see, they can surely clog waterways and make them absolutely inaccessible, both to human recreation, but also to native species. Next slide. So I always like to say, when talking about water chestnut, common misconception is we're talking about the kind that you can buy at the grocery store, and such is not the case. Water chestnut, next slide, actually looks like this. So quickly, you've likely seen it around. We have these rosettes with the toothed edges, and they're connected to a long stem, which can be up to, I think, 12 feet long, and they're rooted down there with some submerged feathery leaves as well. And then one of the most distinguishing features of the water chestnut, and surely the most painful, is the, next slide, is the nut or the fruit. And so this is sort of a four-pronged black nut. They're very, very sharp. They can puncture shoes and skin alike. And essentially, these fruits form on the water chestnut. And in Connecticut, they drop from the plant towards the end of July, beginning of August, where they can remain viable in the soil for up to 12 years. And that is one of their main means of propagation is through these nuts once they drop. So that next year, when it becomes warm again in June, we would see the florets that come out of these nuts. Next slide. So I also like to point out the importance of getting out as many plants as we possibly can. One seed can produce up to 15 rosettes on its own, and each rosette has the ability to produce up to, I've seen, 20 seeds. So if we have 15 rosettes coming from one seed, that quickly could become 300 seeds. And I know there are some sections of our river that are so overwhelmed with water chestnut that it can seem insignificant to pull out a few plants, but this is something that reminds me of the importance to continue to stick with this work and get out as many as you can. Because on the next slide, you can see what happens. This is a picture of Lake Champlain. If you could click one more time. We know that it's really expensive to deal with invasives after the fact. So I admit this data is a little bit old, and it's showing that in Lake Champlain, where they've had a significant infestation, they've spent, at this point, over $10 million to deal with it. So prevention is key here. Next slide. And of course, Hydrilla, the reason why we're all here. So Greg and Summer are going to talk more about their findings, but it's significant to note that the Hydrilla in the Connecticut River is different than the other genotypes that we've seen in Asia, Europe, and in the Americas. And one of the key differences is that they did not find tubers on the roots of these plants. Similarly to water chestnut, they're spreading aggressively. They can grow very long, and surely we've all seen these very dense floating mats that they create, making them inaccessible to recreators and, of course, damaging to our local ecosystems and crowding out native species. Next slide. How do they spread? Well, Hydrilla is particularly frustrating to deal with because when it fragments, it can float downriver into our coves and reroot and start growing again. So it's important that we're trying to, when possible, not fragment the plant. It can be transported on waterfowl, but I think the state collected some data that showed where we have boat launches, it's more likely that we have invasives like Hydrilla. So this is where the clean, drain, and dry program is really critical to make sure that in all types of boats, motorboats, canoes, and kayaks alike, we're inspecting our vessels to remove any fragments of plant that could be left on there before transporting to another water body. Next slide. And then a local example of what the cost can be if we do not check this. So in Coventry Lake, they're spending at this point over $100,000 per year to treat Hydrilla with herbicides, which can be done. But of course, in the Connecticut River, we have additional challenges dealing with levels of salinity, with the tides, and the river flow, which makes it, of course, more complicated than dealing with it in a lake. So next slide. And this is my car down at Haddam, and I kind of like this picture because it demonstrates just how much bigger this kayak is than my car. But I want to reinforce here the importance really of education and outreach, because we want to deal with Hydrilla and also with water chestnut before it becomes an even more pervasive issue than it is. It will be far, far costlier to be seeking out herbicides and mechanical treatments than simply having launch stewards out there talking to boaters about what individuals can be doing to take action to slow the spread of invasives. Next slide. So here at CRC, we have a couple things we're doing and would love partnership with. This is a screenshot of our new website, and it includes mostly water chestnut information at the moment, but we're starting to integrate some hydrilla data. So the gray dots are all the sightings of water chestnut that we've received from the state, from partners, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and that data is all between 1 year and 30 years old. The colored dots, where you see the green and the orange and the yellow, are updates to that information. So for example, I went out, I recorded some sightings that I saw. I talked about those 10 parameters that we were looking at. I uploaded those on the app called Water Reporter, also a website, which then is displayed on this map in real time so that folks can go see where we have issues and where we have needs to address infestations. Next slide. This is the infestation I found at Hartford Reservoir #1 the other day. So just kind of to demonstrate how easy it is, I took this picture. It automatically geolocated where I had taken the picture from. And then the station already existed in our data. So I uploaded the photo. I answered a few questions about what I saw there. So what the distribution was like, how much, what percentage of the water body it covered. And then that is one of those orange dots that you then saw on the map. And then with Water Reporter, as I mentioned, this is mostly geared towards water chestnut at the moment. But we are asking that everyone who uses this system just simply clicks a yes, no for hydrilla sighting. Next slide. And then, of course, I can't not put out the pitch for you to join us in our volunteer groups. We have several site stewards throughout the state, especially in the Low River. The Friends of Whalebone Cove organizes volunteer events as well. And since water chestnut, fortunately, is fairly straightforward to pull out, we offer sort of a platform on which site stewards can get volunteers to sign up under our insurance and organize these events so that we can go out together, maintaining social distance, but to pull up and remove these plants. And we also have a couple seasonal staff pictured here on the right who are working with us this summer. And we had our first pull just on Saturday. Next slide. And then I'll finish with sort of reiterating what we're trying to do on our end with boater education. We're working pretty closely with Nean's panel, who's written up a 5-year management plan for hydrilla, and working with them to walk forward with that. So increasing signage at some of the boat launches. I know the DEEP already does a significant amount of work to educate boaters about all types of invasives, and we're looking to sort of complement that existing program. So working with NEANS to hopefully next year create a program in which we'll train seasonal boat launch stewards who can go out, engage with boaters about hydrilla specifically, but about invasives on the Connecticut River, talk to them about clean, drain, dry, and what they can be doing. And then, as I mentioned, we're recording hydrilla yes or no sightings through Water Reporter, the app and website. And then finally, working with partners like the Marine Trade Association, marinas throughout the area, anglers, outfitters, municipalities in the state, in order to carry out a program that will be truly effective in each of those different areas and industries. So there's certainly a lot of work to continue to do, but we're looking forward to figuring out how we can engage with all these stakeholders to spread the word and not the invasives. So thank you.
Thank you, Kelsey. That was great. And we're right spot on time, sort of, especially since we started a minute or two a little bit late. So where we're at this point is I've been keeping track. We've got some engaged stakeholders and we've got one or two casual observers. I haven't seen a lot of citizen advocates and leadership roles yet. I have a couple of facilitators. So I think there's an advantage to this process of having 4 half-hour segments that maybe we can build some momentum and some awareness. So what I'd like to invite you all to do is you have my email address, I believe. If you don't, it's jdavies at ctrcd.org. And I can send it out again to the invite to the list of people that are on this call, on this webinar. If you'd like to send me a question, if you have any questions for Kelsey, any couple of quick questions, we're happy to entertain them, but we want to be respectful of everybody's time. But if you have questions, I think the best process is to email those questions to me. And I can get answers for you and we can go over them very quickly at the beginning of the next webinar. And we can start building some momentum of question and answer and understanding. So if there's 1 or 2 questions for Kelsey, I know Kathleen was on the road. She had an emergency, so I'm very grateful for the fact that she was able to call in at the last minute. Otherwise, I was going to have to speak to it, and I certainly don't have the knowledge data that she does. And if anybody has a couple of questions for Kelsey, we can entertain those. Otherwise, okay. I hope to see everybody on Thursday for our next webinar. At that one, we will be talking, we'll have Fred Carstensen from the UConn Center for Economic Research, who did a study of the Lower Connecticut River amenity assets, and we'll be talking to Gateway Commission and maybe a local perspective also. So look forward to seeing everybody on Thursday. Thank you very much for attending.